In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for member statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister agree to establish an external review of the workplace culture at Parliament House, conducted by an eminent Australian with appropriate experience and distance from government, such as a former Sex Discrimination Commissioner? Will he ensure that review is conducted in an independent manner and informed by the experience of current and former staff across all parties?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I welcome the suggestion by the Leader of the Opposition, and I noted his statement just before coming in here today, and the government is very happy to sit down with the Leader of the Opposition and other leaders of parties, both in this place and in the other place, to pursue a path like that the Leader of the Opposition has outlined. I'm very happy to do that, Mr Speaker, and I thank him for that suggestion and the spirit in which it's put forward, because I'm sure all of us agree that in the important work we all do here, whether it's at members of this place, senators in the other place, our staffs, we all come here because we want to make a contribution to our country, and we should be able to do that in a safe environment for everyone who is here. So I welcome that suggestion. The government, of course, will continue on with the things I've outlined today. I'm keen to get that moving, and we will. That is about addressing the issues amongst government members and senators and ministers' offices, and so we will continue with that process. That is important. The work that the member for Curtin I've asked to do is very much a work that is being done within our party room, consulting with colleagues on our side, and I would encourage the Leader of the Opposition to pursue a similar exercise amongst his colleagues. And we could swap notes at the end, and I think that would be very, very worthwhile, and I would encourage that process as well. But the suggestion is a positive one, and I take it in that spirit, and happy to work with the opposition and other parties within the parliament, both here and in the Senate, to that end. Thank you.
I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's rollout of safe, effective and free vaccines will aid our continued recovery from the COVID pandemic and build further confidence for businesses and workers to create and get more jobs?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Chisholm. And again, thank you for your great leadership in your community over this past year. It was at this time last year that I was with the member for Chisholm in her electorate down in Box Hill when the first returning Australians from China had arrived in Australia, and the great discipline that was shown by the Australian community of Chinese heritage, particularly in her electorate, was extraordinary and provided a great protection at the early phases of this pandemic, and I commend the member for Chisholm. And today we've taken another big step, Mr Speaker, with the Therapeutic Goods Administration giving the final full safety approval for the AstraZeneca vaccine produced offshore. That has been provided after exhaustive work undertaken by Professor Skerritt and the Therapeutic Goods Administration. It means that it is approved for individuals over 18 years for the prevention of disease caused by COVID-19. We, of course, have the world standard, I would say the gold standard, when it comes to therapeutic goods administrations around the world. And as we've said on many occasions, when we take our children along to be vaccinated, we do so in the confidence of the work of the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and we can have that same confidence when it comes to the vaccination of ourselves and family members and in our community because of the great work that they have done, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, an important part of this rollout is that the people who need the protection most will get the vaccine first, and that is, of course, our elderly population and, of course, our frontline workers working in quarantine, in aged care facilities and work of that nature. Mr Speaker, the Minister for Health has released the vaccine implementation plan for residential aged care, which means in the coming weeks more than 2,600 residential aged care facilities and more than 183,000 residents and 339,000 staff will be reached in the aged care sector. Vaccination for home and community aged care recipients and staff will occur in the community, and these people receive information relevant to that vaccination and situation shortly. The vaccination plan, which is on track and is being rolled out, Mr Speaker, has been done with safety first as the first principle to ensure that Australians can have confidence, and it's an important part of the confidence for our economic recovery. I note that the Australian Bureau of Statistics has today said, according to their weekly payroll data, that payroll jobs are now around the same level as last year, Mr Speaker. That is an extraordinary achievement in the Australian economy, and I want to thank all of those businesses that kept Australians in work. And we as a government were pleased to provide the support necessary, Mr Speaker, to ensure that they could do just that.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Brittany Higgins says that the Prime Minister's Principal Secretary was aware that she had been sexually assaulted in the Defence Minister's office soon after the reported assault in March 2019. When and how did the Prime Minister first become aware of the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, as I said this morning, I became aware of the alleged sexual assault at about 8:30 yesterday morning. That is true. That is when I became aware of it, Mr Speaker, and the first that my office became aware of an alleged sexual assault, I'm advised, was on the 5th of April of this year. Sorry. No, the 12th, I'm sorry, I've misread that, apologies. The 12th of February 2021. That's when my office first became aware, I'm advised, of an alleged sexual assault.
Members on both sides. The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is creating jobs and driving regional Australia economic recovery through the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond? Thank you.
The Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Flynn for his question, Mr Speaker, and acknowledge his great representation of his electorate. A diverse electorate, an electorate which relies on agriculture, an electorate which heavily relies on resources, an electorate which has a wonderful port in Gladstone, deep port doing so much good for Queensland. Mr Speaker, when you talk about agriculture, when you talk about resources, you talk about the COVID economic recovery, because those two sectors are leading the way through the COVID recovery. The resources sector, as the member for Hinkler, the minister, advised us yesterday, is going from strength to strength, and in Queensland, where the member for Hinkler and of course the member for Flynn both reside, there's been a 17.9% growth in the resources sector over the past 12 months. The vaccines, they've arrived in Australia, and frontline workers and vulnerable people will be getting vaccinated starting next week, as the Prime Minister has just indicated. The government's been dealing with COVID on both the health front, of course, but also on the economic situation, Mr Speaker, providing $251 billion in direct economic support to individuals, to families, to businesses and to industry. One of the support packages, the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program, has provided that much-needed and vital support as far as infrastructure is concerned, right across 537 councils, 8 in Flynn, and that has been so well received. But also the economic support to small businesses. Now, I know, and the member for Flynn knows, a fellow in Emerald in Flynn, Ross Drayton. Yeah, I just did know him. Ross Flynn. Thank you. Thank you, member for McMahon. I'm sure you'll be interested to hear that he runs the Central Bike Centre, and he said, with the government's support, our business has been able to employ 3 female apprentices. That's fantastic. He continued, these apprentices are able to develop their skills while helping to grow our business. Without the support of the government, we would not have been able to take them on. It's a win-win. I would have thought you would have liked the fact, I would have thought you, Shadow Minister, the fact that we've got 3 female apprentices getting employed, because I know you're rubbishing everything, you're so negative, but this is about real support in a really good community getting to the ground, and that's what we're providing. and right across Australia, $1.5 billion to 537 local councils, from Cumberland Council in Sydney, represented by Labor members, right through to Carnarvon, well represented, of course, by the member for Durack. It is getting support on the ground. It's getting money in the pocket of those hard-working people, indeed local contractors, local suppliers, local small businesses, providing local workers as we get out of COVID-19, the recession that we unfortunately have had to have.
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. Members on both sides. The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has just, in his previous answer, contradicted Brittany Higgins' recollection that the Prime Minister's principal private secretary knew about the reported assault in 2019 by saying his office learned about this only in the past few weeks. The Prime Minister also claimed that Ms Higgins' statements were confused in his press conference. Previously, the Prime Minister has said victims of sexual assault should be believed. Why doesn't that apply in this case?
The member for Sydney's time has concluded. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I can only inform the House of the information that I know that I've been advised of. And the information that I've been advised of is that my office became aware of the allegations of a sexual assault on the 12th of February of 2021. That is my information. That is what I know to be the information as it has been provided to me, based on what has occurred over these last 24 hours. Now, I can only tell you what I know to be the case based on that information presented to me. I can't provide another set of information. Mr Speaker, I note the statement that has been issued today by Brittany Higgins, and I welcome that statement. And Mr Speaker, that statement, I think, recognises the steps that the government is taking, and I welcome the additional suggestions made today. And I note, Mr Speaker, it concludes with this. I ask for my privacy to now be respected as I begin to emotionally recover from this difficult period and wish to make no further comment. Now, Mr Speaker, I will be complying with that request, Mr Speaker, and we will be seeking to pursue this matter through the mechanisms that I have already announced today, and also potentially through the other mechanisms that have been suggested.
Just before I call the member for Indi, I'd just like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon Mr John Haslam, a former member of this House for the electoral division of Canberra and the current National President of the Association of Former Members of the Parliament of Australia. On behalf of the House, a very warm welcome to you. The member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. On the 30th of November last year, I asked a question in the House calling for sufficient funding for rail precincts in the Indi towns affected by the Inland Rail project. Since then, the government has announced an additional $5.5 billion to the Inland Rail project. This is more than 50% of the initial budget. Deputy Prime Minister, how much of this will be spent on increasing the budget in the Inland Rail upgrades in Wangaratta, Glenrowan, Benalla and Euroa to deliver outcomes that meet community expectations?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And in my previous answer, I talked about the COVID recession, and if there's one project also in the infrastructure space that's helping build out of the COVID recession, it is the Inland Rail. And certainly I know it's important for the member in her seat of Victoria, but when it comes there, when the Inland Rail is delivered in Victoria, and I'll certainly get to the specifics of her question in a short while, but for the Narromine to Park section, the first section of the Inland Rail, 99 businesses have benefited to the tune of $110 million. Now that's delivery. Now I know the member is particularly interested in the fact that we've allocated more money to the rollout of Inland Rail, and that was necessary because it's gone from, in many parts, a desktop analysis and the design work right through to actual delivery, where there's more culverts, there's more connection with roadways, and there's more necessity to, of course, provide those separations. So the initial outlay for inland rail has been increased, and that's because we've seen the additional scope required, and as a good government we've sensibly budgeted for it, and that's what you'd expect a good government to do, of course, and we've done that with full engagement of local communities. Now, in the member state, the inland rail is going to deliver an expected $8 billion boost to the Victoria's gross state product. Now, in relation to station,
just to pause for a second, I'm just conscious he's almost halfway through his allotted time, and the question was very specific about how much would be spent on certain locations to meet community expectations, and I'd just ask him to be relevant to the question, or if he doesn't have the material at hand, to perhaps provide it in another way. The Deputy Prime
I've directed
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've directed ARTC to work with local communities, including those local communities in the member for Indi's electorate. And in response to local interests, community working groups were established in Euroa and Benalla. Appreciate you mentioned Wangaratta too, to collaborate on the detailed design for station precincts and to consult on the engineering solution to raise or relocate existing infrastructure to accommodate double-stacked trains. Now, we will, of course, continue to engage, the ARTC will, with local communities. Very happy to again pass on your concerns to the ARTC. They're working collaboratively and consultatively with those local communities. Constructive engagement with the working group in Euroa has enabled the ARTC to incorporate the aspirations of the local council and community, including what's called creating a civic precinct document, into the requirements for early contractor involvement. ARTC will continue to engage local communities and, most importantly, establish those groups and shop fronts where people can actually acquire a job, where local businesses can acquire procurement, because that's what inland rail is all about. And whilst I appreciate there are local stations which also the member would like to see upgraded, that's also a matter for the state government in Victoria.
The member for Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and my question is to the Treasurer. How is the Morrison government's strong and decisive economic leadership continuing to support jobs and livelihoods while ensuring the fundamentals of our economy continue to recover strongly from the effects of the COVID-19 recession?
The Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I acknowledge the member for Ryan's service as a member of the Brisbane City Council for a number of years, and his support for policies that have delivered tax cuts to 74,000 people in the electorate of Ryan. Now, Mr. Speaker, today the Australian economy got another piece of positive economic data about the strengthening labour market, Mr. Speaker. Payroll jobs are up by 1.3% for the fortnight across all states and territories, back to the level they were a year ago, Mr. Speaker. It follows the data yesterday from the ATO, which showed that 2.1 million Australians have graduated off JobKeeper. 520,000 Australian businesses have graduated off JobKeeper in the December quarter compared to the previous period. We saw a 70% fall in West Australia in the number of people on JobKeeper. We saw a 64% fall in Queensland, the number of people on JobKeeper, and a 60% fall in New South Wales of the number of people on JobKeeper. We've seen the unemployment rate come down to 6.6%. We've seen 320,000 jobs created in the last 3 months. We've seen 90% of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the start of this crisis now back at work. And in the RBA minutes released today, it pointed to the economic recovery across the Australian economy occurring earlier and being stronger than first expected. And then when it comes to the unemployment forecasts, and they've been upgraded, and when it comes to the unemployment number today, they say they've even beat the most optimistic scenarios as recently as November last year. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is occurring. This recovery is underway because the Australian people have worked so hard to help suppress the virus, but also because of the unprecedented level of economic support from the Morrison government. $251 billion has been committed. More than $140 billion is out the door. That $251 billion is equivalent to 13% of GDP. The JobKeeper program, the cash flow boost, the coronavirus supplement, the $750 payments to millions of pensioners and carers and veterans and others on income support. That has helped deliver the results. Now, Mr Speaker, as businesses and their workers graduate off JobKeeper, like Jack's Tyres in Mitchelton, where Dean has said the support was excellent at a time when the world was in lockdown, the transition period was well communicated and allowed us to prepare. The JobKeeper program helped us stay on our feet. So, Mr Speaker, he's been able to keep his workers employed, like we've seen right across the country, because of the strong support from the Morrison government.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Brittany Higgins was reportedly sexually assaulted in the Defence Minister's office almost 2 years ago. The Prime Minister said just here that his office was not informed about this until just weeks ago. Is it acceptable that the Defence Minister was aware that a reported serious crime had been committed in her office but did not inform the Prime Minister or his office?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, and it shouldn't happen again.
The member for Herbert.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is backing small businesses to help them transition from JobKeeper and to grow and create jobs for our recovery from the COVID-19 recession and beyond?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And I know that he's a tireless advocate for small businesses in his electorate of Herbert in North Queensland. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government has always backed small businesses and their workers. And of course, through our very targeted and swift economic response to this pandemic, we gave Australian businesses the confidence that they needed to keep going, to keep their doors open as they worked their way through this very uncertain and challenging time. And Mr Speaker, now we're backing them to create more jobs and to create those jobs not just now but also for the future. And there's plenty of evidence that our JobMaker plan is working. We've seen a return of almost 90% of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic, and more than 500,000 businesses employing over 2 million Australians have graduated off JobKeeper as at the end of December. Now, one of those businesses in the member for Herbert's electorate is Access Therapy Services. Now, they are an occupational therapy business, and the owner, Joanna, has said that without JobKeeper, her business would not be here today. The payment was a lifeline, but now they've graduated from JobKeeper, they're back on track, and they're very optimistic about their future. Now, there are stories like this right across Australia of the recovery that is happening, particularly across our small businesses. But, Mr Speaker, we don't just support businesses in times of crisis. We support these businesses throughout the years. And one of the ways that we do that is through our entrepreneurs programs. Now, that provides services, it provides grants to small businesses, and particularly the Business Growth Grant is focused at supporting businesses to make sure that they become more competitive. Now, the results of this program absolutely speak for themselves. On average, a business that is supported through the Entrepreneurs Program creates 4.4 new jobs and generates over $1.5 million in increased turnover within 12 months. Now, it's practical programs like this that continue to give our small businesses confidence. And as they come through this pandemic, it's the confidence that they need. Confidence in the future, confidence that they will be able to support their workers, that they will be able to sustain their businesses, and that they will be able to grow our businesses. And, Mr Speaker, this government will always support small businesses. We recognise that they are the key to our economic recovery.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And my question is again to the Prime Minister, and I ask, does the Prime Minister have confidence in his Defence Minister?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, I do, Mr Speaker. The Defence Minister, having looked into this matter over the last day and a half, and in my discussions with her, was seeking to provide support to Brittany in those circumstances, and had exercised judgment in relation to protecting her privacy. Now, Mr Speaker, that judgment on that, of course, is being called into question. And that issue, Mr Speaker, I think will carry with it some important lessons that I think the many processes that are now getting underway, and indeed the others have already been discussed here today, I think can address those issues. This is a shattering incident, as I've said. It is very serious, and we are taking it very, very seriously, Mr Speaker, from the moment I became aware and the actions that we are taking. Now, Mr Speaker, we can do this together, or we can do it in another way. I'm keen to do this together and address this as a parliament, Mr Speaker. I don't think this should be a matter of politics. It should be a matter of keeping people safe in this building.
The member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Can the Minister please update the House on the latest developments in the COVID-19 vaccine TGA approval and how all Australians can be confident in the Morrison government's vaccine rollout?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for McKellar, particularly for his support of the community during the lockdown of the Northern Beaches, encouraging them to come out and be tested in, I think, pretty much record numbers, and that has helped keep them safe. The next step in keeping Australians safe is the rollout of the vaccine, and today we had the Therapeutic Goods Administration approve the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that's important. It follows the European Medicines Agency. It follows the advice overnight of the World Health Organisation in endorsing and providing their own approval. And so these are very important steps for the safety of Australians, for the protection of Australians, for the confidence of Australians, and therefore for the uptake of the vaccine. In particular, what's especially important is the protection that is made available from the AstraZeneca vaccine. The article published in the esteemed Lancet Journal on the 3rd of February said, and I quote, "COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca confirms 100% protection against severe disease, hospitalisation and death in the primary analysis of Phase 3 trials." The World Health Organisation said overnight that the AstraZeneca vaccine was shown in clinical trials to be safe and effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19 with no severe cases and no hospitalisations more than 14 days after the second dose. As a world, we're learning more about these vaccines. One of the things we are learning is the degree of success in prevention against serious illness, hospitalisation and loss of life. And so this comes with the announcement yesterday that the Pfizer vaccine has now landed on Australian shores, is being assessed in terms of its quality and its integrity, and is due for rollout next Monday to Australians. And the importance of that is that we will begin, as the Prime Minister said, with over 240 aged care facilities expected to be inoculated in the first week. That means at the same time we'll be supporting our quarantine and border workers, assisting those who are supporting Australians in our hospitals, our frontline health and medical workers. All of these people are either at risk of contracting the disease and retransmitting, or they are most vulnerable Australians, and they will be those to whom we turn first to give them the support and the vaccine. But today is another important day in saving lives and protecting lives.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Prime Minister. How can the Defence Minister maintain the Prime Minister's confidence when the Prime Minister agrees that the Defence Minister was aware for 2 years of a reported serious offence occurring just down the corridor from his own office, which potentially attracts a custodial sentence and did not inform the Prime Minister or his office according to his own statements?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, my understanding is the Minister acted in good faith towards Brittany and sought to support Brittany. Brittany, I understand, chose not to make a statement to police about this matter, but the Minister, I understand, encouraged her to make a statement to the police about this matter. The agency of individuals, of Brittany in this case, or anyone else who would find them in this case, the power to make the decision about how they wish to proceed is something we have to respect. And Mr Speaker, this is a very difficult situation, and it's one that I'm sure the Leader of Opposition would agree, that in terms of the safety of the people who work in this building, that no party has a mortgage on this type of behaviour. And so let us address it together.
The member for Mallee.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Regional Health, Regional Communication and Local Government. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison-McCormack government plans to protect regional, rural and remote communities from the COVID-19 pandemic through a safe and effective rollout of vaccines?
The Minister for Regional Health, Communications and Local Government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Mallee for her question and acknowledge her lifelong commitment to the health of the people of the Mallee region long before she came to this place and since she has become a member of this House. Following on from the Health Minister's answer just then, I want to reassure the people of regional Australia that the vaccine rollout will be nationwide, and that there is no discrimination in the timing from the larger capital cities to the regions. The Health Minister just mentioned that next week the rollout starts protecting aged care residents and workers and frontline health workers. That is across the entire continent. It is not just in the capital cities. And there's Mr Speaker, regional Australia has done very, very well through this pandemic. The communities have managed to keep themselves. Probably some of the safest places on this planet has been in regional Australia. That's not a fluke. That's because the communities of regional Australia have taken COVID-19 seriously. They've reacted accordingly, and they've done that because, despite their success, some of these communities are some of the most vulnerable communities health-wise we have in this country. And that's why we have got the logistics. The Deputy Prime Minister and I saw on the weekend the capacity of DHL to deliver these vaccines to the four corners of this country in a condition that is the same as if they were going a short distance. Linfox will be involved with the AstraZeneca rollout as well in some states. And so that when the rollout happens, it will be done in a number of ways. The expressions of interest have closed with general practice. They're being assessed at the moment. Discussions at the moment with state governments as to how their facilities are going to chime in for this. And also, not long behind that, we'll be doing arrangements with the pharmacies that have shown a lot of interest, as well as Aboriginal controlled medical centres and in some cases maybe flying squads that will come in. Mr Speaker, regional Australia not only has been the safest place probably on the earth over the last 12 months, but has also played its part in keeping the economy of this country running. Regional Australia has underpinned the economy of Australia over the pandemic, which has enabled this government to do what it's needed to do to protect Australians. And so it's important that the people of regional Australia are protected so they continue on that vital role of keeping this country moving.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to reports that the government has this morning ditched a section of its industrial relations legislation which allows for pay cuts, which the Prime Minister repeatedly said did not exist. Will the Prime Minister now admit he was trying to use COVID as cover to cut workers' pay?
The Leader of the House and Minister for Industrial Relations.
Well, of course we won't admit that, because that's not true. It's not even close. It's not even close to being true. There was a part of the bill which would have extended a provision that was inserted into the Fair Work Act by Labor. It would have extended it, in our view, in a very modest way. We will remove that from the bill. Why are we doing that? Because we take a practical, pragmatic approach, and we want to see as much of this bill as possible find passage through the Parliament, because the bill contains a range of measures that will grow jobs, put upward pressure on wages and help businesses survive through COVID. I might say also that removing this small, modest part of the bill does also have another upside. It does also have another upside, which is that it removes the smokescreen that Labor have created as to why it might be that Labor would not support tougher penalties to stamp out wage theft. Why would Labor not support the first ever Commonwealth criminal penalty for wage theft? Why would Labor not support what is in this bill, which is a new small claim stream?
The member for Kingston is warned.
Why would members opposite not support a new small claim stream for the recovery of wage underpayments? Why would they not support that? Why would they not support proper civil penalties for wage underpayments? Why would they not support the first ever criminal offence for wage theft? Why would they not support increased penalties for sham contracting? Now, those become very, very interesting questions in the context of the member for Watson recently saying this: vulnerable workers getting their money back quickly has to be the highest priority.
Cutting their pay is a problem.
No one here can find a single valid reason why you wouldn't support the first ever criminal penalty for wage theft, why you wouldn't support civil penalties to stamp out underpayment, why you wouldn't do something as practical and pragmatic as having a small claim streamment for wage underpayment. But members opposite now say they'll oppose all of those things, but are without a reason for opposing them, other than the fact that as part of their political strategy they are willing to have those workers end up as, in their own words, collateral damage.
The member for Braddon.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on how the Australian Border Force and Department of Home Affairs are providing logistical support in the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question, for his advocacy and his great work in his home state of Tasmania. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government obviously has taken many decisions over the course of the last 12 months or so dealing with COVID. Mr Speaker, the first decision, of course, that we took was to close the border initially with China and then with the rest of the world, and that has stood us in good stead, even in parts of Europe, the United Kingdom, for example, where people have been holidaying in Europe and then coming back to the United Kingdom. That makes it very difficult to contain the virus. And here we have worked day and night to keep Australians safe. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the government have provided significant support through a number of mechanisms to Australian families, to workers and to Australian small businesses as well. And the phase, of course, now that we move into is not just protecting Australians from the virus coming into our country from offshore, but also making sure that we can roll out the vaccine to protect, in particular, vulnerable Australians, older Australians, people in aged care, nursing homes, people in Indigenous communities, frontline health workers, police, Border Force staff, etc. And, Mr Speaker, the work of the Australian Border Force really deserves credit, and they deserve great recognition for the way in which they've been able to work with our airlines and in particular with our freight carriers. As we know, Mr Speaker, over the 12-month period up to the 1st of February this year, the total air arrivals into Australia has decreased by a staggering 97.4%. And the Department of Home Affairs has worked, along with Border Force, to make sure that the vaccine rollout can take place in our country. They've worked very closely with the Federal Department of Health and with their state counterparts. And I know that since November of last year, the ABF has used their working relationship with the supply chain partners to make sure that they can facilitate the clearance of 240 vaccine reagent samples in support of the TGA certification process. The TGA, Mr Speaker, is recognised around the world as being the most competent body to assess whether or not it is safe to have one of these vaccines. And the work that they've done is quite remarkable, and it should be relied upon by all Australians. Mr Speaker, yesterday the Australian Border Force worked very closely to pre-clear 23,790 vials of Pfizer-approved COVID-19 vaccines that will provide the dose to 142,000 individuals in our country. We should all be proud of the effort of our country. People have made sacrifices from one end of this country to the other, and we will continue to do everything we can to keep Australians safe during the course of the vaccine rollout and to make sure that we can recover in the best possible way.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. The question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister dump the other provisions of his Industrial Relations Bill that also allow cuts to workers' pay?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, that is not what the government's bill does. It's not what it does. And Labor can say it, they can assert it, they can do all of this, Mr Speaker. They can engage in the overreach that they are engaged in, Mr Speaker. But I think Australians know, and indeed whether it's employers or employees know, Mr Speaker, that the measures that we've put forward in this area are modest measures. They're measures that have resulted from a series of good faith discussions between unions, between employers and others, Mr Speaker, to arrive as a set of practical measures that are simply designed to get more people into work as we come out of the COVID-19 recession. Now, Mr Speaker, we got more dialogue and engagement from the union movement than we got from the opposition here, Mr Speaker, and they've lived up to their name when it comes to this. And opposition was about—
Member for Cooper, member for Corangamite.
It's just been about no, Mr Speaker. That is the leader of the no opposition that we see over there, Mr Speaker. So we will engage with parties who are interested in engaging us in good faith to get Australians back to work. Now, we have done that with One Nation in the Senate. We're keen to do that with other parties in the Senate to ensure that we can progress these bills to ensure that we can get more Australians back into jobs as a result of the terrible impacts of the COVID-19 recession. That's what we're doing, Mr Speaker. The opposition is just engaged in overreach negative politics.
The member for MONCRIEFF.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is building export opportunities and creating jobs, which is of critical importance as we continue our recovery from the COVID-19 recession?
Fantastic question.
The Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for MONCRIEFF for her question and also for her hospitality last week when I went to the Gold Coast and did various forums with her and Minister Andrews and Minister Roberts and got some very good feedback, not only about our tourism sector but also about what great exporters there are on the Gold Coast. And one of the things which really stayed with me was that sense of community that's still there on the Gold Coast and how everyone's working together to deal with the pandemic and to come out of the pandemic. Mr Speaker, we are working day and night to make sure we are creating opportunities for our exporters. Since we came to government, 8 free trade agreements have been finalised, including with Japan, South Korea and China. And the reason we're doing this is because trade creates jobs. 1 in 5 jobs in Australia are a result of trade, 1 in 4 in regional Australia, and we will keep creating opportunities. And that's why we're pursuing free trade agreements with the United Kingdom and with the European Union. Already, through what we've done through our free trade agreements, we have preferential access now to 2.7 billion consumers. Preferential access to 2.7 billion consumers. That means our exporters are getting an advantage when they're trading with all those consumers. And if we can finalise agreements with the UK and with the EU, that will create preferential access to another 515 million consumers, leading to more jobs, more businesses, more jobs, more exports. But we're not just resting on our laurels there. We've also announced that we're going to be undertaking scoping studies to Israel and also to a group of countries called EFTA. That's Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Scoping studies which will be concluded at the end of the year, at the middle of the year. So if we look and finalise what we're doing with the EU and the UK, we will be able to move on to those countries. Now, why will that be important? Well, Israel is a good key destination for many of our exports, and when it comes to the EFTA countries, financial services in particular is a huge opportunity with those countries. Now, the others might scoff, but if you look at our track record compared to yours, Leader of the Opposition, ours stands absolutely second to none compared to yours, because none is when it comes to concluding and finalising free trade agreements on your side. We're about protecting jobs and creating jobs on this side.
The member for McMahon, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
ASEAN. What's ASEAN compared with Liechtenstein?
Members on both sides. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that under his industrial relations legislation, Section 193 of the Fair Work Act is amended so that workers, instead of receiving cash for their overtime and allowances, can be paid in kind?
I haven't even called the Minister yet. Members will cease interjecting, particularly those who I mention regularly, who then seem astounded when they're ejected under 94A. The Minister has the call.
Thank you. The ability of the Fair Work Commission to take into account non-monetary benefits in making its determination about enterprise agreements was placed in the Fair Work Act by the Labor Party.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the Minister update the House about how the Morrison government's gas-fired recovery will ensure Australians have access to the affordable and reliable energy we rely on, while at the same time creating jobs?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Reid for her question. And like all of us on this side of the place, she's committed to affordable, reliable energy as we bring down our emissions and we support new jobs and support a strong economy, Mr Speaker. I recently had a chance to visit the Concord Golf Club in her electorate, where we saw them using a combination of old and new technologies to drive down their energy costs and drive down emissions at the same time, Mr Speaker, including solar pumps, which are used by farmers across this great land, Mr Speaker. Now, we know on this side of the place that as we recover from the pandemic, businesses need affordable, reliable energy, and central to that is our gas-fired recovery, Mr Speaker. We want to see Australian gas working for all Australians in our electricity grid, across industry for critical products like fertiliser, and across households, Mr Speaker. And the ACCC's gas inquiry out today tells us and highlights the good news on gas pricing for Australian businesses and the Australian economy more generally. The report has found that prices offered in 2021 have fallen by as much as 50%, from $8 to $14 a gigajoule offered in 2019 to mid-last year it was down to $6 to $8 a gigajoule, Mr Speaker. This is good news, but we know we need to do more to make sure that Australians lock in those prices, internationally competitive prices, over the long term, and that includes more supply. And I note that the Minister for Resources is doing an enormous amount of the work in this area. He knows that more supply will flow on to lower gas prices and, importantly, to lower electricity prices, Mr Speaker, because gas generation is integral to our electricity system, Mr Speaker, and you only have to look at a few events that have happened in recent times to see this. On the 17th of December, as renewables struggled in New South Wales following a partial outage of Liddell, we saw electricity prices go to $10,000 per megawatt hour. The gas came on and they were immediately down by 75%, Mr Speaker. That's what gas does: flexible, fast start, dispatchable generation, bringing down electricity prices, keeping the lights on, Mr Speaker. And I note, Mr Speaker, that there is growing support for the gas-fired recovery, not just on this side of the House, but amongst the more enlightened members from the other side of the chamber, Mr Speaker. Meanwhile, everyone on this side of the House is absolutely committed to the affordable, reliable energy that all Australians deserve.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that when his government made its fuel security announcement last September, there were 4 operational refineries in Australia, and now there are just 2, and those 2 are under immense pressure?
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, that is indeed correct. There is enormous pressure on those refineries in Australia because the significant changes that are going on regarding refinery capabilities all around the world and the competitiveness and the margins that are in those sectors, and that's why the government has taken a series of initiatives, Mr Speaker, to address those very pressures. And the government will continue to pursue those measures, Mr Speaker, as we're dealing with those great challenges. And I'll ask the Minister for Energy to add further.
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course, we're very disappointed by ExxonMobil's recent decision to close the Altona refinery. And Mr Speaker, we are very conscious of the impact that it will have on workers and their families. Mr Speaker, we'll work with Exxon and the Victorian Government to ensure that they get the support they need. But as ExxonMobil has noted, this decision was not a reflection of local policy settings, Mr Speaker, was not a reflection of local policy settings. And as the Prime Minister has said, we've put in place a comprehensive package, Mr Speaker, to ensure that we have the fuel security in this country that Australians deserve. Mr
Members
Speaker,
on my left.
The fuel security that Australians deserve. And that includes, Mr Speaker, a mandatory minimum stock holding, an increase in 40% of the diesel that will need to be held by importers, wholesalers into the fuel market, Mr Speaker. And on top of that, Mr Speaker, we have committed to a production payment for the refineries, which, as ExxonMobil and BP have both pointed out, their decisions were made completely independent of those local policy settings, Mr Speaker. We can assure Australians that fuel security is foremost in the focus of this government and was central to the package announced by the government last year.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Will the Minister please update the House on the progress of Western Sydney Airport and how this project will benefit people in Western Sydney, including creating critical jobs as we continue our economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Well, I do thank the member for Lindsay, who of course is absolutely committed to delivering economic opportunities for the people of Western Sydney based upon our very comprehensive rollout of infrastructure for Western Sydney and leveraging the economic opportunities that come with that, working closely, of course, with the Berejiklian government in New South Wales. And Western Sydney Airport, Mr Speaker, a $5.3 billion investment. You know, there needs to be 25 million cubic metres of earth moved. I was at the site just last week, or the week before last. They've already moved 10 million cubic metres, Mr Speaker, and on track to be complete by 2022. So the airport is on track to open by 2026. to take 10 million passengers a year. 28,000 jobs, direct and indirect, will be generated within 5 years of the airport opening, of course on top of the jobs created during the construction process. And we're hard at work with tenders out for the airside works and pavements. The tenders for the terminal have already closed. And this is part of a much bigger plan, Mr Speaker. The Commonwealth and New South Wales governments again working together on the metro, the rail connection to the airport with a $5.25 billion Commonwealth commitment. There's the M12 motorway, which will connect to the airport. There's the Northern Road, Mr Speaker, $1.6 billion project, 35 kilometres, 6 stages, 3 of them complete. In fact, on my visit to the airport, I was struck by the fact that the Luddenham has changed significantly, with that part of the Northern Road now completed so that it no longer crosses the Western Sydney Airport site. And of course the Western Sydney City deal, 3 levels of government working together to leverage this massive piece of infrastructure. It's an integrated plan, Mr Speaker. It's job-generating infrastructure. It's about integrated urban planning. It's about business and investment attraction. It's about governance through the Western Parkland City Authority. It's 3 levels of government working together to deliver jobs, deliver economic opportunity. We're not just building an airport, we're not just building a rail line, we're not just building roads. What we are doing is transforming Western Sydney in a project that will deliver jobs and prosperity for Western Sydney, for the nation, and for all of us will benefit from this extraordinary project, which is on track, and 2026 is going to come very soon.
The member for Shortland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister tell the House yesterday that the Safer Communities Fund guidelines had been followed when, in fact, the Minister for Home Affairs announced 2 grants during the Braddon by-election before the guidelines had even been written? How on earth can the Prime Minister claim guidelines were being followed when they didn't yet exist?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, the guidelines and the processes for undertaking the grants that the minister did engage in, Mr Speaker, were followed. That's how I can say that, Mr Speaker, because that's exactly as it's done in relation to the grants that related to those particular funding announcements. That's how we can say that, Mr Speaker.
Say to the member for Kennedy, the call alternates. So I'm calling the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is providing greater care and support to Australian women living with ovarian cancer and their families? And will the Minister outline how the government is also acting to increase research so we can defeat this illness?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Higgins for her question and her interest in this important policy area. February is Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month. This is an important opportunity to educate Australians on ovarian cancer and to raise awareness by sharing stories of women and their families affected by the disease. Sadly, 4 Australian women are diagnosed with ovarian cancer each day, and more than 1,000 were estimated to have died from the disease last year. Research remains our best hope of defeating ovarian cancer and of developing more effective diagnosis and treatments to prevent or control the disease. Over the last 10 years, successive governments have provided over $71 million for ovarian cancer research through the National Health and Medical Research Council. Additionally, $16.9 million from the Medical Research Future Fund has been invested in groundbreaking ovarian cancer projects. Our government also provides funding for a range of other measures to support women with ovarian cancer and their families, including the listing of life-saving and life-changing medications on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. This includes the recent extension of the PBS listing of Lynparza, meaning an additional 300 Australian women with ovarian cancer each year will have access to a medicine that would otherwise cost $140,000 per course of treatment. This morning in Parliament House, members had the privilege of hearing from an inspirational woman fighting ovarian cancer, Caitlin Delaney. Caitlin is in her early 40s, a mother of 2 daughters and an IVF scientist who was first diagnosed 4 years ago. The conviction and passion in her personal story spoke for all women suffering this cruel disease. She said, "I have 2 beautiful daughters, Lilith 8 and Willow 6. Neither of them can remember a time when they weren't being stalked by this frightening, invisible monster that sometimes makes their mummy so sick she can't move. My beloved husband, Kevin, has had to take a step back from the job he loves to care for me, to lift me when I can't stand, to comfort me when I wake up screaming in the night, to nurse my grief for what's lost." Caitlin also told us the word impossible has never meant less. She said, "In the last year, a scary, strange year, I saw our country come together to achieve impossible things, and it gave me that ever-elusive hope, because it told me that we can change the story of ovarian cancer. It is for women like Caitlin that we continue to fund support services and research to eventually find the cure to something that once seemed impossible."
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Mr Speaker, briefly on indulgence, it was indeed my great honour to be there this morning as well with the Prime Minister and members of the government and from across the House. Caitlin Delaney, I am very proud to say, is one of my constituents, and her beautiful young girls from Stanmore Public School were there this morning with their brave, courageous, magnificent mother who gave quite an extraordinary speech. It was quite a moment in this House, and I think it's available for people to look at either here or outside in the general public. Ovarian cancer is something that hasn't got the same attention as perhaps breast cancer or prostate cancer. It is a debilitating disease, and we are, I think, all committed, both sides of Parliament, to taking action on it, and I thank the Minister for her response.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister tell the House yesterday that the guidelines have been followed for this program when the Minister for Home Affairs approved the 2 grants he announced during the Braddon by-election, despite advice from his department that the projects were, and I quote from the department's advice, unsuitable and ineligible?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the guidelines that relate to such grants that require that where a decision is made by a minister, which they are empowered to do, then they give a statement of reasons for that purpose, which the minister did, which is what the requirement is, Mr Speaker.
The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the NDIS and the Minister for Government Services. Can the Minister update the House on how service delivery has improved under the Services Australia during the COVID-19 and more broadly? And how does this compare to previous service delivery approaches?
The Minister for Government Services.
Mr Speaker, let me thank the member for his question and his great interest in service delivery in his part of the world. As a result of COVID-19, we all recognise many Australians have had a difficult time, and many, over 1 million, have sought assistance from government for the first time. And in the face of enormous challenges, service delivery has been of primary concern for the Morrison government. Right the way through the pandemic, all 327 Centrelinks have been open. Every Centrelink is open in Victoria today. Can I thank the various state police services who've helpfully visited 220 times to check if all regulations are being followed, as they are, and I welcome them to continue to visit. Our digital channels have been operating. 300,000 concurrent users is the current capacity. It's now been upgraded to 500,000 concurrent users as we prepare for the COVID-19 vaccination rollout. In terms of daily MyGov and digital channel sign-ins, 12 months ago, average 570,000 Australians signed in. At close of business yesterday, 2.8 million individual logins as Australians embrace the use of digital to receive services from government. As a note of interest, in July last year was our busiest day, 4 million individual logins seamlessly. For an authenticated platform, MyGov has the largest capacity of any platform in the country. and it's being modernised. You can go now to MyGov and see the MyGov Blue and see where government is taking this as a world-leading platform. In terms of customer reference numbers, there's no need for Australians to go into a shop front. It can all be done online. And last week we crossed over to 2 million digital identities now being created by Australians. 2 million digital identities. And all this has meant is we've been able to provide services to Australia quicker and faster. Right now, there is only 7 days in terms of the majority of processing for social services and welfare. In terms of claims on hand, social services and welfare, it's 5 days' worth. Health processing is 3 days and child support is 8 days. We're routinely answering over 110,000 calls a day. The average speed of answer is circa 5 minutes. And I hear those mocking the other side. 10 years ago, those opposite hung up on 40 million Australians in the 10-11 financial year. Unfortunately, our number's 469 for this financial year. Our average speed of answer is circa 5 minutes. In 2013, when this nation put this government across the other side, finally to the sword, 90-minute wait is what those opposite was the legacy they left. This government is getting on with service delivery.
The member for Kennedy just pipped the member for Shortland. Then I'll give him the call.
Prime Minister, China's U of Q Pavlo incident revealed an insinuating into our teaching institutions. The revelation of strategic intrusion at Daru, Yam Island and Cape York's Tip, and the extraordinary Darwin Port and Stage 2 and 3 ore development decisions threatening territorial occupation. Prime Minister, it's understood you intervened to terminate China's Global Switch as the Defence Information Systems contractor. Surely immediately terminating the extraordinary renewal of Global Switch's contract would be applauded by every Australian.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to see the member for Kennedy is still quick on the draw and his athleticism knows no bounds. Mr Speaker, in response to the member's question, I'm advised that Defence has migrated its most sensitive data to a purpose-built data centre. Consistent with the whole-of-government hosting strategy, Defence data migrations of sensitive ICT data and assets was completed ahead of schedule and under budget prior to the expiration of the original Global Switch Ultimo lease in September 2020. Defence is now progressing work consistent with this strategy to migrate less sensitive and unclassified data assets to an alternative data centre. I'm further advised that Defence has and will continue to retain full operation and control of its data holes and within the Ultimo data centre. Defence has in place strict security arrangements, including 24/7 Defence security precedents, remote CCTV monitoring and regular security audits. The Foreign Investment Review Board, you're right, when I was Treasurer at the time, put in place strict foreign investment conditions on the operations and security since the initial transaction. Now, this is important, Mr Speaker, because in addition to that, in addition to the mitigations that were put in place, this government announced and has legislated the most comprehensive reforms of Australia's foreign investment framework that we've seen. And critical to those is the national securities test requiring mandatory notification for investments in sensitive national security land and businesses, but also a last resort power giving the Treasurer a further opportunity to review actions for which approvals have been given if exceptional circumstances arise. There are also stronger enforcement powers to increase penalties. What that means is the protections that were put in place as a condition of that approval means if they are not adhered to, then the Treasurer has the power to act in the national interest and intervene. These are powers that we've put in place to continually strengthen our Foreign Investment Review Board scheme. This is a world-leading scheme. It's designed to protect Australia's interests. We have had the most significant changes to this regime under this government and maintain the confidence of foreign investment in this country at the same time, including through a pandemic. So I can assure the member that we take these issues extremely seriously, and no government has acted more to strengthen our foreign investment rules to protect our sovereignty than this one.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Defence Personnel and Minister for Veterans Affairs. Today marks the 79th anniversary of the Banker Island massacre. Will the Minister please outline to the House how we are commemorating those Australians killed in this tragic event and how the Morrison government is acting to support our women veterans and defence personnel?
The Minister for Defence Personnel. I'll just wait for the members can just cease interjecting for a second while I call the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the member for Robertson for her question and her interest in our serving men and women and our veteran community. And among the most tragic stories of World War II was the sinking of the SS Viner Brook. And 65 nurses sailed from Singapore on the Viner Brook on the 12th of February of 1942, bound for Australia. They were heading home. Half an hour from Sumatra, the Viner Brook was bombed by the Japanese and sunk. 12 of the nurses were drowned or killed in the water, and the rest struggled to reach the shore of Banker Island, some having spent more than 60 hours in the water. And tragically, Mr Speaker, one group of 22 nurses and one civilian woman were found and ordered to march into the sea, and then they were fired upon by their captors. Vivian Bullwinkle was hit in the left side by machine gun fire, and the force of the blow pushed her underwater. She feigned her own death until it was safe enough to struggle to shore. She was made a prisoner of war, though. She crawled into the jungle. She was made a prisoner of war and joined some of her other survivors from the Viner Brook who were also prisoners. They were imprisoned on Sumatra, where they remained until the war's end more than 3 years later. It is one of the most tragic but inspirational stories of survival. Sister Bullwinkle retired from the army, though, in 1947, and she went on to become the Director of Nursing at Melbourne's Fairfield Hospital. She devoted herself to the nursing profession and to honouring those nurses who were killed on Banker Island. She raised funds for a memorial. She served on numerous committees, including the Australian War Memorial, and later President of the Australian College of Nursing. The Banker Island massacre, Mr Speaker, will be remembered tonight at the last post ceremony at the Australian War Memorial through the story of Sister Rosetta Joan White from Fish Creek in Victoria, in my neighbouring electorate of Monash. Speaker, a lot has changed in the 79 years since the Banker Island massacre, but it's stories of courage and determination like that of Vivian Bullwinkle that inspire the current and future generations of Australian service women. I'm proud today that there is no role in the Australian Defence Force that women can't undertake, and that diversity ensures we have even increased capability within our Defence Force. More than 15,000 women serve in the Australian Defence Force today, protecting our nations, serving our communities, doing invaluable work to keep us safe. Recently, more than 2,000 women served on Operation Bushfire Assist, Operation COVID-19 and Operation Fiji Assist, assisting with recovery efforts at home and abroad. We have seen many great examples too, Mr Speaker, of these inspiring women going on and making a huge impact in their civilian lives when they leave the Australian Defence Force. There are many outstanding stories of female veterans who've gone on to be leaders in both the public and private sectors. We have them here in this place, members of Parliament. We have advocates for supporting the needs of veterans in the community and have others in corporate life. In fact, I note the presence today of retired Wing Commander Sharon Bown, who's in the gallery. Coincidentally, Sharon's here today and she'll be at the last post ceremony this evening as well. To all those women who served, we say simply thank you for your service, and to those who, as we commemorate the 79th anniversary of the Banker Island massacre, may we simply say, lest we forget.
The Leader of the Opposition's just on indulgence. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for his comments and associate the Opposition with paying tribute to the women who've served in our armed forces in the past and those who continue to serve today. I thank him for the courtesy as well, the Minister, of a heads up that this response would be given on this important day. The Banker Island massacre is indeed one of the darkest days in our history, but the bravery of Sister Bullwinkle and others who've served do serve as an inspiration, and we are all very humbled. Those of us who get to serve in this Parliament are humbled by those who serve in our uniform each and every day.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On that note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Leader of the House with